Runyan. Welcome back to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark.
Frequent visitor, and we are so glad every time to get you back on. Great to see you again. You're still in Estes Park, correct?
Oh, yep. Under a lot of
And-
snow right now.
Yeah. We're talking on Thursday, March 14th, and the Front Range, and I guess much of the foothills, including Estes Park, the mountain areas are getting pounded with snow.
Yep, absolutely. We've got at least 2.5 feet.
Wow. Holy smokes. Good day to read and drink tea, maybe?
Yep, exactly. That's exactly what I'm doing. My mug of tea. Yep.
I didn't see a snow shovel in your hand, so I figured for now the snow is safe.
Yep, it just sits. My kids have a snow day, so we're just taking it easy. I'm trying to get some words in.
Yeah, you're always getting words in, I have a feeling.
Yes.
Well, the news from your world is a brand new book, just came out this month. Drum roll, please. Yep.
Yes.
Memory of
Remember
Lavender. Little shiny
lavender
on the
and
video. Yeah.
there we go.
The
The memory
memory
of
of
lavender and sage.
great.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And I think lavender is quite the theme. I was in a Starbucks recently. It seemed like they're pushing lavender like crazy.
I know. I think it's in honor of my book, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. We arranged it. We arranged it. No. And there's a tea company that's making like lavender tea infused like donuts and things like that I keep getting advertised and people keep sending me pictures. And yeah, it's interesting because I think it is becoming more prevalent in culinary circles. And whereas like when I was living in Provence 20 odd years ago, my host mother said it wasn't a culinary herb. You don't cook with lavender. What are you talking about? Yeah.
Well, we are going to ultimately talk about the fact that you've got quite a few different kind of little turns in your career, nice turns in a very successful career. But before we kind of dive into that topic, tell us about the new book, tell us where it's set, and give us a rough idea what's involved.
Well, it starts off in New York City, and the suburbs. Actually, my character Tempesta Luddington, who the Seattle Times awarded the best character name of the month, which that's definitely I can basically retire now. She, it's a really appropriate name for her, but she grew up in the East Coast of the United States, grew up in Connecticut, and she has a job as a food critic in New York. It's the dream job. It's like the Julia Child equivalent of The Devil Wears Prada if we're doing, Meryl Streep movie themes. Because, instead of working for a fashion magazine, she's a food critic. But she's really disaffected with her work. And she has a very complicated relationship with her family. And we open with the funeral of her father, who has passed away at, fairly young, like 58. And it turns out that her brother is going to inherit, because they're from a wealthy fundraising family. Her brother's going to inherit everything. And she's left a modest remembrance from her mother, who'd passed away, a couple of many years before. And so she finally has this little bit of independence, because you can imagine a food critic for like not the top newspaper in New York is not a well-paying gig, and New York, it's even less so. And so she has this money, and it gives her options for the first time, and she decides that she is going to go visit the village where her mother grew up in the south of France. It is called Saint-Colombe, and she ends up buying a ramshackle farmhouse sight unseen, and wackiness ensues, so to speak. But she goes to Provence, and she learns a lot about herself, because she'd been in a family situation where she was always told that she was less than, that she was incapable, that she was impetuous. And of course, yes, she buys a farmhouse sight unseen. So, I mean, she has this impetuous streak, but it's something that was kind of groomed into her instead of being innate in her. And she learns a lot about herself when in this newfound independence, and learns about her gifts, and learns that this is where she really belongs.
Wow. Wow. And did you get to go to Provence and poke around and inhale and just eat and, just take in the
Yes, yes, yes.
atmosphere? Yeah. not
Yeah,
too.
I was very fortunate. I got to go well, I lived in Provence when I was 18 to 19. I turned 19 over there. And so that there's some of that energy is in this book. You know, she's 28 years old. She has her life more figured out than I did at the age of 18, obviously. But you know, there's kind of that energy of independence and finally, you know, learning about yourself and proving to yourself that you could do things. And that was really organic in my own experience. But I did get to go back to Provence in 2022 when I was drafting the book. And I did a big long tour with my husband. And we spent quite a little bit of time in Provence taking pictures and just breathing in the sights and sounds and, you know, trying to refresh my memory that, you know, from 20 years back when I was a student there. And it was just as enchanting as I remember. And
Yeah,
we got to visit the village Bustier Saint Marie, which is kind of the vision of what Saint Colombe could become, but even maybe a little bit too touristy for their liking. But it's you know, it's a thriving village that's remote and out of the middle of nowhere. You don't go there by mistake. You have to choose to go there, but people do because it's so beautiful. And that's what I hoped would be the fate for Saint Colombe. But then we also visited some villages like Vienne, which is a village of 600 people. That is a you know, very quiet, very, very quiet. And that's kind of what Saint Colombe is at the opening of the book.
that's great. So now this novel, did you say, by the way, what year it's set? Is it
Present
contemporary?
day,
Okay, it's
yeah, it's
contemporary.
contemporary, it's
Okay.
present day, 2023-ish.
Yeah.
There's no references to the pandemic or anything, but it's just basically present day.
Yeah. And have you ever written a contemporary novel?
No, this is my first contemporary novel. I did write a section of Across the Winding River was set in the 1990s. So, or wait, it might have been early 2000, like 2007. I'm trying to remember back, but it had to be a little bit further back in history just to make the ages work. Because she would have been awfully young to be the daughter of a World War II vet if it were present day. And so, yeah, that was, so this is basically my second attempt at anything close to contemporary, the first full length contemporary. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
How did you go into thinking about this in terms of what the major challenges were going to be for your major character? What did you go in knowing the big obstacles that she would be facing, or is that something that you just had the general idea and a theme and you knew you'd develop some hill to climb once you got there?
Yeah, you know, this is one of those things where, you know, in my historical fiction, which has been my bread and butter heretofore, the history provides a scaffolding for the story. There's a series of historical events, and especially if you're doing you know, World War fiction or war fiction of any kind, there are external stakes built in. You know, if the pacing gets slow, throw in an explosion and all is well, and it's fun from that perspective. But of course, it requires a real diligence with the research. Whereas with the memory of Lavender and Sage, all I had to invent all the external stakes because there aren't like random, you know, invasions and explosions in Provence in 2023. You know, thankfully. And so it really wasn't until the second draft that I really focused it, honed in. I realized what the external force was, and it's the school. The school closing is really, you know, the central focus for this town because there is a phenomenon in France known as the empty diagonal, and it spans from the northeast to the southwest. And I drove through the southwest of France, and trying to find a gas station or a public restroom was one heck of a chore. I'll tell you, and it's because these villages are emptying out because the young people just don't have the job opportunities anymore, and they don't want to be farmers necessarily. And it's just they are flocking to the medium to large cities in order to find work. And so there are dozens and dozens of villages where there's not a resident under the age of 60. And it's like the extreme, you know, and the diagonal really does go continue down into Spain and Portugal. Portugal is a really interesting case in which all the young people are in Lisbon and Porto, and the villages are empty of young people. But going back to the main idea here is that I was reading an article that said that once the school leaves a town, it's the death knell for the village, because that means no young people who are, who have children or want to have children will move back in, because there's no services for them. And, the decisions to keep schools open and closed are done at kind of a regional level, the rectorat. And I was actually part of the French school system for a while, and it's very complicated. But yeah, so I realized that we had to focus in on the school, and there being legitimate concerns as to whether or not it could serve the children. But a lot of that sort of thing, the romantic tension and the interpersonal relationships, those are all things that in my historical fiction I allow to happen organically as I'm writing. I don't necessarily chart out, how certain relationships are going to progress. It's hard to think of that in time. You have to get to know your characters. But this book is so much about those relationships and things that, without the scaffolding, it was a frustrating first draft. I'll be honest, it was. I joke that the difference between historical fiction and contemporary fiction is an extra 6 months of beating your head against a wall, trying to figure out what the story is. But eventually, when I focused in on those external stakes, it really came together by draft 3.
And so she's an outsider coming into a small area as well. So to have a voice and a say and to be able to exert herself or her opinions, I would assume, created some extra challenges too.
It does. She and the mayor Poe do not get along, because Poe was not a fan of her mother. And that is an interesting plot point. So, we get into the fact that, she's got this established relationship in a place she's never been, an established reputation because of her mother. And over the course of the story, we learn more about why her mother left and why, her reception into the town wasn't as warm, or at least indifferent, as she might have expected, especially from the older generation. And there are definitely two camps of people: those who were fond of the vie school women and those who were not.
By any chance, is there a winery involved here anywhere?
No, actually, there isn't. There's a greenhouse, and it's interesting. This is the inspiration. She gets a necklace at a thrift shop, and it has different herbs on it. And I actually found it online because I'm a very visual person. Like, I wanted her to have a necklace with herbs on it. And I Googled one, and I wanted to find one that looked like it could be kind of thrift shop-ish, but I found this was not thrift shop prices. But I found it. I'm like, well, I'm going to wear this while I write to kind of invoke her, to kind of invoke Tempesta's mood. But she has a greenhouse. A neighbor helps her rebuild a greenhouse because there's one on the property that's in terrible repair. And she learns that she has a great gift for growing herbs. And so there's lots of that ties into food. There's a little bit of, there's definitely some libations involved, but they don't actually visit a vineyard in this one. And of course, there are some good vineyards in the area, but we really focus a lot on the food because she is a food critic. And her, being able to step into a kitchen with fresh ingredients, some that she's grown herself, and being able to create something without, without her critic brain, cycling through, oh, well, this isn't original enough. This is very derivative of blah, blah, blah. And her being able to reconnect with her joy of cooking, I thought was something that was really fun to explore.
Right. Well, let's take a look back. I mean, I was kind of checking a little bit in the past conversations here on the Rocky Mountain Writer podcast. I think we go back to 2016, and talking about the Canadian novels, the original Canadian novels back in the day. At that time, it seemed like that was what you were going to do. And then along came some World War II related historical novels, and you're somebody who continues to pivot and to look for new territory. Talk a little bit about that journey and thinking about, your career and all the different interactions you've had with publishers, and still just, you're so productive. No matter what happens, it seems like you are just always going to be working on something new?
Yeah, well, part of it is just intellectual curiosity. I like working in various areas. And, part of my ADD squirrel brain is that I hate being in between projects. So if I have 87 projects going at a time, there's always something to work on. And I love that. And, I wanted to branch into, and this is not to mean that I am leaving historical fiction behind, quite the contrary. I have, that's where my heart really is, but I adored writing this really sensory his contemporary fiction. And the goal is, I wanted to write about Provence. I wanted to write, something immersive and sensory and food centric set in Provence. And, the story eventually happened. And it came to me, and I had just the opportunity with the lovely people at Harper Muse to be able to write it. They trusted me that they gave me a 2-book contract. The second one will come out next spring, and I'm working on that one right now. And I just was very fortunate to have that opportunity. And a lot of it is when you get asked if you could write something, or you see an opportunity, you jump at it. And that means that I have been working a lot the last couple years, because I've had a book out. I had a book out in 2022 and 2022 and 23, if we count the anthology that I wrote with 2 of my good friends, Rachel McMillan and Janelle Soselsky. And then this year I have 3, with The Memory of Lavender and Sage. And then I have a historical, we can talk about that more later, and another anthology with Rachel and Janelle coming out this fall. So, it's busy. It's been a lot, but all the same, being able to explore different areas, but finding ways to make them overlap to keep your readership base happy has been a fun challenge. And I've really enjoyed the opportunity to work as much as I have, because the only thing worse than too much work is the opposite, not enough. And so I've just been extremely fortunate. I started off at Kensington with my Canadian colonials, and it was pretty clear that Canadian colonials were not going to be the next big thing, unfortunately. And that was pretty clear almost right out of the gate. And so I knew I had to pivot. And the goal is to keep writing. I mean, I'm not so married to one specifically. Revolutionary era historical fiction. I'm not so, I'm not I don't have a PhD in Revolutionary War era history, for example, that makes me want to focus on those as a genre. I'm more of a Jane of all trades, so to speak. So I pivoted to World War II because that's where the market was going. And, I don't say right to market, but I found stories that were trending to market that I was excited about. And that's kind of the ticket there. And I had a very successful run with our good friends at Lake Union for 3 books. And then, we decided that we wanted to pivot my career to the Big 5. And William Morrow was wonderful enough to accept the School for German Brides in a bakery in Paris, and Mademoiselle Fell. And, I hope to keep going with them for a while. But then with Harper Muse, which is another HarperCollins imprint, I've done a couple of collaborative works and at least 2 contemporary novels, and we'll see what the future brings as far as that's concerned.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, if you were counseling or coaching a young writer about finding that mindset that is open to all sorts of possibilities. And I mean, I think it's easy to imagine a first-time writer coming out of the chute and working on their first novel, that you get very clingy and graspy and possessive of it because it is your first baby. But you also, I think, Aimie, you have demonstrated a really kind of just open mind, open capacity that's open to various things that come along. So if you were to convert that into a little coaching lesson for a young writer, what might that sound like?
Be curious. To quote Ted Lasso, be curious, not judgmental. And yes, we all have the thing. I would have loved to have written more books set in the late 1600s in Canada. I wrote my master's thesis on the topic. And it was a topic I was fascinated by, the feminine immigration from France to Canada. And, those books did really, I have to say, my publisher did a great job as a backlist publisher, in that they kind of hitched their star to Lake Union's wagon. and did a lot of price dropping and things right when Daughters of the Night Sky came out. And so those books have earned out and are now commercially successful. So that's as much as an author can hope for, which is wonderful. But be curious, be open to new ideas. Find the story that excites you where the market is headed, because there's no sense in writing books that people aren't going to read. And yes, we all want to break out and do the next big thing. And if you have something that's completely off the wall, that's not writing to market, by all means, give it a shot. If your hook is strong enough, your concept, like you're going to write, I don't know, vampire Jane Austen or something, and you can get an editor excited about it. Boy, because let's look, what is it, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies? I mean,
Yeah.
people were, it's the weirdest thing, but people went crazy for it. So, I mean, yeah, take some risks, but pay attention to what the market's doing. Pay attention to what people are reading. But also bear in mind, people are reading what the publishers are producing.
And that seems part of it. You are in conversation with your publishers, you're in conversation on a regular basis, and you're not afraid to hear that the market has shifted.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you have to, the thing is, yes, it's sad. I'm fortunate. I've not written an entire book that I've had to trunk, mostly because I refuse to work on a complete book on spec anymore, if I can get away with it. I've sold a lot of books on half a manuscript, and that's a nice place to be in. But it is disappointing when you have a concept you're super excited about that they say the market's not ready for it. And what often happens is when the market's ready for it, somebody else is already doing it. And I had that happen with a concept I was super excited about. Granny O'Malley, the Irish pirate queen, wanted so badly to write a story about her. But unfortunately, somebody else is doing it now. But I was told I could not follow up Daughters of the Night Sky with 15th century Irish pirates. I mean, okay, I see the logic, but it is what it is. But you have to listen to what your editors, because they're trying to create a brand for you. I'm not going to follow up the memory of Lavender and Sage with a space opera. I'm just not, because that's not, I mean, people have responded, and thank you to everybody who's read it and reviewed. The reviews are just so touching. Saying, oh, it's like a warm cup of tea when you've had a really bad day. And that's partly what I hope for. I mean, I came up with the idea during lockdown, and I said I wanted to create virtual vacation fiction, which I think I've effectively done, taking some of the immersive aspects of historical fiction and applying them to the contemporary fiction. Um, so yeah, listen to what your team has to say, because they want you to be successful. They absolutely want you to be successful. So we followed up Daughters of the Night Sky with Girls on the Line about the American telephone operators in World War I. And it's probably one of the top two favorite books that I've written of my own. And I absolutely loved writing that book. And it's from a historical research perspective, one of my strongest up till now. Now you have to say Mademoiselle Eiffel was even more research. But I'm really proud of that book, and I'm glad I listened. I'm glad I listened, because I don't think that Granny O'Malley would have been the right book to follow up Daughters of the Night Sky.
Very good. Yeah. I just think it's interesting to try to encourage younger writers to think about their whole career and not just that first opening salvo. It's a hard thing to do, to think about
It
both.
is.
Yeah, but
Yeah, and I know a lot of authors who, if one pen name didn't work out for them, they've had to pivot to a new pen name. But even more commonly, I've seen people switch genres, and completely pivot away from what they were doing. Like I have a friend who's pivoting from, sweet romantic women's fiction to a fantasy. I don't know if it's romantasy or just straight up fantasy, but I've seen it happen plenty of times. And if they've struck out with the what they're doing, you don't keep trying for better results with the same product. You just don't, you know.
yeah. Do you think any writer, beginning writer, who puts their mind to it and decides to really, invest the time in the process can get traditionally published as long as they keep improving their writing?
Yeah, I think it's possible. You know, honestly, this book, this is a business of resilience. And, you know, it's hard sometimes. Like historical fiction had a rough summer last year. It did, almost across the board. And it's not to do, it's like independent bookstores are selling it like hotcakes, but it's not being bought by big store books like Costco and Barnes and Noble has changed their ordering algorithms. And so it was a hard summer for historical fiction. So guess what? If you've got a really soft literary historical fiction, table that idea for a little while. Table it for a little while and come up with the burner of a book. Because that's going to be what you need right now, especially if you had quiet sales for a previous book. I think that if you're impressing your editor with the quality of your work, B, you're showing that you are willing to do the marketing and willing to put in the shoe leather to get your books out there, which, you know, I definitely have been. Then I think that that goes a long way. I think that being willing to discuss, like, you know, I am more than happy to sit down with either of my editors and say, okay, these are the ideas I have, but what do you want from me? What would excite you from me? And you know, listening to that honestly, because again, they're not, you know, of course they're not omnipotent. They don't know what the market's going to be like when the book comes out. That's the hard thing. Books are slow. Books take a year or more to produce. And so you know, but being open to those conversations, because there are ways, you know, there are some pretty clear indications about how the market's trending. And you know, proving yourself to be a hard worker and B, coachable goes a long way. Will you have setbacks? Yes. Will you maybe have to pivot, you know, various things, but it's all about getting knocked down 10 times and standing up 11.
Yep. So tell us about the historical fiction that's coming out later this year.
Oh, so on September 10th, Mademoiselle Fell is coming out from William Morrow. I think we have a final cover, but we're working on getting the rights for all the different parts of the images. So there will be a big splashy cover reveal soon. But it's a story of Claire Eiffel, who is the oldest daughter of the famous architect Gustave Eiffel. And she became his right-hand woman. She is an absolutely undersung or unsung heroine from history, which is right in my bailiwick. And her mother died when Claire was only 14, and she immediately took over running the household for her father and, you know, taking over the raising of her four younger siblings. But in addition to that, she grew in influence in his business affairs. He whisked her off to Portugal 2 months after her mother died to be his, you know, basically his companion while he was overseeing the final days of the building of the Maria Pia Bridge in Porto. And I just loved how her influence grew and grew with her father, but then there was a glass ceiling because she could not go to the Polytechnic to study engineering, and she just didn't have the technical skills. It's hard to say whether or not she had the desire, to be honest with you, to be able to, you know, actually become an engineer. So she couldn't take over the Compagnie Fed, which was, but then her brothers certainly were not of the sort, and they become a real thorn in her side. But they weren't able to really take over the company as well because they were kind of ne'er-do-wells. But it's a story of her and her growing influence over her father, and it all centers around the World's Fair of 1889. And it was a fun book to write. I got to go to Paris to do research, and it was great.
I'm sorry for you. It's tough.
Yeah, I know. I got to hang out in the Musée d'Orsay, in the archives, in the Eiffel family archives. I got permission from the family. It was just incredible. Just one of those experiences that won't be duplicated.
Yeah. Musée d'Orsay, just fabulous by itself, let alone getting in the
Yep.
archive. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, Paris is pretty special. I just love that city.
Oh, it is amazing. It is amazing. There's no place like it.
Yeah, it just seems
And
like
I got to spend a week there just last year. It was amazing.
Yeah, that's great. Wow. And do you want to give a sneak peek on the anthology too? Just a little more of a preview?
Yeah, so it's called The Liberty Scarf, and it is the story of three women at the end of World War I trying to get home for Christmas because there was a big promise we're going to get all of our troops home for Christmas. And of course, that wasn't entirely successful, but they are all these three stories are unified by a beautiful scarf from Liberty of London that becomes very significant to all of their stories. And that was a great deal of fun to write with Rachel and Janelle. And the next contemporary is called The Wandering Season, and it's still very much being written.
Ah, and the location for that though?
All over the place. It starts off in Estes Park. They let me write the first couple of chapters in Estes Park in Denver, and then she gets an engagement ring and a DNA test for Christmas, and neither of those things goes according to plan. And so she ends up on this crazy tour through Europe, visiting all the places where her family are from: Ireland, rural France, the north of Italy, and Copenhagen. And she is visited by visions of her foremothers, and it is so much fun, so much fun. And it's also a very foodie book, very foodie. She's a kitchen muse. That's her official job title. She is a consultant to restaurateurs and things like that.
So there's a definite overlap thematically with Memories of Lavender and Sage there.
Yes, definitely a foodie overlap, travel, immersive, getting to spend time in County Mayo in Ireland. And I get to go there this summer. It's going to be great. And it's going to be, really immersive and, because I want to transport the readers. That's what my historical fiction does. And this doesn't transport you back in time, but it transports you to another place, and hopefully with a lot of detail.
But it sounds like based on that story that she also goes back in time with all these issues with her ancestry, that there's historical touchstones as well. So it's
Yeah, definitely. I know that, of course, being historical fiction kind of being my wheelhouse, those scenes are always fun. If I get stuck, I just jump to the next historical scene.
Well, Aimie, this has been a great rundown and a great window into a busy writer's life. As always, we like to recommend a book at the end here, a book or a writer, something just to pass it along a little bit.
So I've been listening to the audiobook of The Devil and Mrs. Davenport by Paulette Kennedy, and it is astounding. It is a gothic horror, domestic suspense set in the 1950s, and all of the sexual politics that are involved in that, and the wife of a professor of divinity. And they're perfect, a seemingly perfect life, and how it is absolutely not. And it is, beautiful writing, extremely immersive, and, the most punchable villain I've encountered in a long time.
Excellent. Well, good luck out there. Just quickly, based on all your marketing travels and all that, is Colorado Gold on the schedule for you this year?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, I have a conflict that weekend. I'm
Yeah.
really sad to miss it. It's been a while since I've gotten to go, but I do hope to get it back on the rotation one of these years.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. Good luck with the new title and the new pivot. And thank you for jumping on the podcast.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark.